Close your eyes. Listen carefully. Outside, can you hear it? It's adventure, it's joy, it's music. When I was a kid, one of my favorite Pokemon episodes was called Hypno's Nap Time. Ash and friends end up in a city called Hop 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 Town, which is totally a place that exists in the Kanto region. That's why Gary Oak has 10 badges. But more than the thrill of the detective investigation or the eeriness of hypnotizing kids away, what fascinated young Cecily to this episode was the idea of this lively, bustling city being home to lots and lots of Pokemon. The central theme of exploration in Pokemon is, of course, based on Satoshi Tajiri's childhood memories, catching bugs in rural Japan in the early 60s. A time when Japan was restructuring itself after World War II, as millennium-long traditions were slowly being replaced by sprawling urbanization and industrialization. The early Pokemon anime speaks volumes about that, a nostalgic memory of rural Japan that, by the time the 90s arrived, were starting to become just memory. Pokemon as a series has always been connected to the vast wilderness, the big outside, roaming far and wide to connect to these creatures in nature, in their biomes, which is why, when Legends ZA was announced as a game that would take place entirely within Lumiose City, many people were surprised, disappointed, confused. How can we play Pokemon without going outside? Exploring nature, living home on an adventure. There needs to be more, right? Can nature, connection, and biodiversity even exist within a city? Many content creators were already suspicious of ZA 2 years ago, ready to not enjoy it and review bomb it. But not me. Because, you see, dear stranger online, I kinda love big cities. I have always been fascinated with cities, big, sprawling, busy, colorful, alive, and I understand that it might be a bit awkward to expect to find connection to nature in narrow alleyways other than your Pidgeys and Rattatas. I guess that being from Brazil and seeing my fair share of wild animals next to me in traffic helps my imagination a bit. But maybe that's why, to me, this one slice of life in Pokemon was something that has always been missing from the games. Saffron and Goldenrod are cool and feel big, if you have a kid's imagination to fill in the gaps. But as Pokémon World Metropolis with a lot of buildings you can't go inside, why are there no Pokémon living here? We constantly hear stories of kids who want to be the very best like no one ever was, but where are the stories of people who live just like us? In their silly little towns and go through their silly little lives, meeting the same neighbors in the same streets and the same cafes, with Pokemon by their side. A Pokemon world that feels real need bakers and their Pokemon, artists and their Pokemon, musicians and their Pokemon, software developers and their Pokemon, and these people were always much better shown in the Pokemon anime than in the games. That's why Hop 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 Town fascinated me so much. You had this bustling metropolis cut by immense parks with rooftop green spaces where you could, perhaps, run into a pocket of adventure. Because, surprise surprise, nature is something that can, should, and does exist within cities. Because we are nature too. In Pikachu and Pichu, the short film that plays before The Spell of the Unknown, you see this Pichu guiding our friend Pikachu to meet a crew of urban Pokemon. Characters who make their homes and safe havens between alleyways and behind buildings, merging ecosystem and urban life. In The Power of Us, a cast of colorful characters in a Ghibli-esque city live their days among people and Pokemon, with festivals, catching contests, and challenges. From a scientist who is terrified of Pokemon to a grumpy old lady who despises them. Silly little stories that make the Pokemon world feel real. Because I'm not sure about you, but I live in a city, and I was always really curious about city life in the Pokemon world. And at the end of the day, Pokemon being an RPG, immersion is the key word here. What really got me pumped to go once again to Lumiose is the chance to get what Hypno's Naptime, Pikachu and Pichu, and The Power of Us hinted at all those years ago. A silly little urban fable that felt alive. A town bustling with real and complicated stories, all intertwined around a bigger one. The story about imperfect people who fall back in love with the town. As I write this love letter to Pokémon Legends ZA, I've just beaten the main story in about 80 hours. I took my sweet time getting to know every nook and cranny of Lumiose, engaging with its characters and many side stories, hunting for shinies on the roofs of restaurants and slowly but surely making my way up to the top rank of the ZA Royale. I know I still have much to see in Lumiose, but I literally haven't stopped thinking about this game since it was released. I would even dare to say this is probably my favorite 3D Pokemon game to date, as per thumbnail. And before going into all that, I need to tell you, this is a very spoilery video. I try to write it in a way that doesn't discuss endgame stuff or separates it, but I can't. I can't tackle the themes and story of ZA with the same level of complexity I would like without talking about the conclusion of all these characters, so here's your warning. However, there will be no post-game spoilers, and the chapter titles under here will help you navigate and see what part of the game I will be talking about. Also, as this is the longest video I've ever done, sorry if it's not as concise as usual, and I will take it lighter on the editing front, so it's easier for you to just listen, and I can publish it in time for it to still be relevant. Because I honestly think Legends ZA is more than a story about Pokemon, it's a story of real people, complex, struggling, complicated people, who happen to be living in the Pokemon world. A world that faces fantastical challenges like murderous, carnivorous, Little Shop of Horrors plants, but also mundane challenges like gentrification, in a hilarious tale that is filled to the brim with heart. And among all of those stories, maybe the most important is yours, the players. Today's video is about, yay, politics, about segregation, anti-homeless benches, and the housing crisis that is very real, both in Paris and in Lumiose City. It's about how to find community in a world where the X and Y axes seem further apart than ever. This is also a video about how ZA is not a perfect game, and how improvements might not always come in a linear fashion. This is a video about annoyingly long tutorials, missing mechanics from previous games, and why does it have to be so hard to take a silly little photo on a bench with my Pokemon? But I'm getting ahead of myself, let's circle back to the most important character in Pokémon Legends ZA. You. Pokemon as an RPG has always had as one of its most important defining characteristics the self-insert protagonist, all the way back to Red and Green. It's even a recurring joke in the Pokemon franchise how Red, the main character of the first generation, never says anything. He isn't supposed to say anything because he needs to be a clean slate for the player to project themselves onto. What the protagonist is saying at any given moment in a Pokemon game is whatever you, the player, is thinking, and that's the entire point. It's your story, your team of 6 Pokemon that will always be different from the one your friend chose. Except in Sinnoh, I guess. The protagonist has your name, and you are the original trainer forever ingrained in your Pokemon summary screen. Having only Red as the self-insert protagonist is a little limiting in terms of who can identify with him. So, in the sequel to Red and Green, you can now be Chris if you want. With the jump to 3D, things get interesting. The protagonist isn't stuck as a 2D sprite anymore, but now can be a reflection of yourself as you are or would like to be, with multiple skin colors, hairstyles, and outfits. Gone are the days when Professor Oak would ask if you're a boy or a girl. Pokemon now just asks you, what do you look like, and kind of assumes your pronouns from there. That's been a massive staple of the series since X and Y, and was kept in later entries until a big dip in Scarlet and Violet. Entirely set within a school, we had not more than like 12, 14 outfits to choose from, almost all school uniforms. That left many fans extremely disappointed, and alongside the abysmal performance on Switch 1, it was one of the biggest criticisms many people, including me, made of these games. Scarlet and Violet are weird entries in the series. I did enjoy the hundreds of hours I put into them. They had the most compelling story and characters of any Pokemon game until then, while at the same time feeling really rushed and unfinished from a technical side. A vast open world that oftentimes felt empty if not for the Pokemon, and the inexcusable performance on the Switch 1. The real reasons why they were shipped in that state might stay unclear forever. It's one of those projects developed during the pandemic, and the tight deadlines and merch machine pressure to have a new generation every 3 years, which we will discuss more later, makes that really visible. Going back to Kalos for Legends ZA, Game Freak knew they had to deliver in this aspect. It's Paris, like, come on. I know this might sound like a secondary aspect of the game for many people, but it truly is not. The immersion of a Pokemon game only works if the self-insert protagonist works. And for that, the player needs to truly see themselves in the character and in the story. The Pokemon Company is very well aware of who their player base is. One of my favorite 1-star reviews for Legends ZA is this lovely comment from Google user Jeremy Hart, which feels like rage bait, but I think our friend Jeremy is really onto something here. He writes,
Unless you're its target audience, which seemingly is young to middle-aged females that are happy with cute gimmick features and subpar content that hasn't seen an upgrade in the last 20 years, this game is not for you.
The Pokémon Company can tell through market research that their player base isn't the usual gamer bro Call of Duty player you would often see in other gaming environments. Pokémon appeals to a really diverse crowd. Yes, people who grew up with Pokémon since the 90s and know the mechanics inside out, but also younger kids who might be getting into Pokémon for the very first time. But also, and just as important, and if you've ever spent more than 5 minutes online interacting with the Pokémon community, you will know, is the queer and neurodiverse communities. I know this might somehow sound like a super hot take given the current climate of discussion around this game, but from what I've seen, the overall consensus from the Pokémon community, creators I follow, subscribers of this little channel, and overall fans has been of just feeling extreme delight when playing through ZA. Of coziness, of an immersion that we haven't felt with Pokémon since we were kids, and I share that feeling too. There is a common take in the broader gaming community from people who maybe haven't played Pokémon in a very long time, or just don't engage with the series much, to dunk on this game and call Pokémon fans the Disney adults of gaming. And again, if you didn't enjoy this game and have your own criticisms, that is totally fair. There are things to dislike here. It isn't in any way an affordable game, and some creative choices will not be everyone's cup of tea. And I will go over my own issues as well in this video. If you don't care at all about the story and are here just for the gameplay loop, that's also valid, and the game should appeal to you too. Although I'm not sure if you're going to find much joy in many JRPGs. Nevertheless, I just believe that most of the bigger YouTube videos floating around tend to focus on the same few criticisms that barely looked past the beginning of the game, with lots of focus on visuals or the setting, and I genuinely don't think any of them are bad. Videos with hundreds of thousands of views claiming this game looks like it belongs on the PlayStation 2 make me feel really old because they clearly have never played a PlayStation 2 game in their lives. Honestly, I know that might be an unpopular opinion, but I genuinely believe this game looks quite good where it needs to look. Charismatic Pokémon, memorable characters, and engaging story beats. Guess I'm not a Windows sommelier, but when playing an RPG I do appreciate a good story, and funnily enough, none of the videos I saw will dive as deep into the story or the characters of Legends ZA as I will do with you today, dear stranger online. So see this as my attempt to talk about something else. What I meant with my controversial tweet, and also controversial video title, I didn't really want to use it, but I need to play YouTube's game, I'm so sorry. But what I mean when I say this game is an 8 out of 10, but if you like Pokemon, it's a 16 out of 10, is that I truly believe that Legends ZA understands who Pokemon fans are and does what it can to deliver to them a cozy, diverse, and most importantly, immersive experience. Even before the first gameplay trailer was revealed, we already knew this game would be set entirely within Lumiose, while its urban redevelopment plan was being executed by this cool tech startup named Quasarticle. They used the holo technology created by Lysandre in X and Y to create high-tech holograms and segregate Pokémon within wild zones. That's their solution to ensure Lumiose City can be safely shared by humans and these new migrating Pokémon. Since the events of Pokémon X and Y 5 years prior, there has been a mysterious influx of wild Pokémon migrating into Lumiose, and Quasarticle's end goal is to eventually abolish these areas to enable people and Pokémon to live in perfect harmony and all that PR talk. A city more beautiful than before awaits all of us. Where did I hear that before? This next part is an important detail and will be really relevant later. Only after Quasarticle started working on their redevelopment plan and moved on to conduct repairs and improvements in Lumiose's postcard, the Prism Tower, they became aware of something strange. The tower was emitting something they call Mega Power, that was being detected in all corners of Lumiose. This energy that is directly linked to Lysandre firing the ultimate weapon causes wild Pokémon to lose control and rogue Mega Evolve. According to AZ, who was directly involved in the construction of Prism Tower, because he's old, only the strongest Mega Evolution user can harness the power of Floette to stop the Prism Tower from eerily glowing purple. So instead of, asking the champion of Kalos, who canonically should have at least 3 Mega Pokemon by now, they decide to turn Lumiose into a nightly battle extravaganza, to the despair of all neighbors, and Quasarticle starts a battle royale to find the super strong trainer. And there we have our gameplay loop. Catch Pokemon in wild zones during the day, compete in the ZA Royale at night. All brought to you by Quasarticle Inc. Leading to the release of ZA, there were many people theorizing that we could maybe leave the city to have excursions to other Kalos routes and catch Pokemon there, or explore a very deep system of terrarium-like catacombs, but I always had the impression that this was mostly wishful thinking. I think it was very clear from the beginning that Game Freak wanted to work on a smaller, more condensed map, to both explore a new gameplay approach to an urban Pokemon game, and also try different story styles. Work on relationships between multiple characters that would necessarily have to know each other because they're neighbors, instead of just running into strangers who are spread out throughout an entire region. Team MZ already exists and have their own culture when you meet them, and secondary characters are interconnected through mutual relationships. Like that 6th degree of separation thing, and that enables a more interconnected story. It was probably also a clever strategy to avoid the same performance issues from Scarlet and Violet in a game that also had to run smoothly, and it does run smoothly, on the Switch one. In my opinion, Game Freak succeeded in creating a city that feels alive and busy, with things to do, shops to shop, cafes to chill, but most importantly, people and Pokemon to meet. With a really condensed map, the right Pokemon from Legends Arceus are made kind of unnecessary. With the basic running movement, you can cross the entire condensed map in just under 2 minutes, a thing that will never happen during a playthrough because you will inevitably get distracted by 15 other things that are happening in the map at any given moment. Whether it is an alleyway to explore, a stair hidden behind an obstacle, an interesting Pokemon in a wild zone, a cute shop, or an NPC with a funny side quest. This slower character movement incentivizes you to pay attention to the details in the city and the little stories all around you. Movement puzzles, which in early Pokemon would be centered around strength boulders or ice cave sliding, are now parkour courses, which can reward you with access to new areas, inaccessible rooftops housing rare Pokemon, TMs, and these colorful screws which can be exchanged for a Twitch streamer plushie with magical powers. Sorry Naveen, not Twitch streamer, Canari, more on her later. I have seen people complaining that, oh, you can't fly or climb walls to reach the top of buildings, but that's literally the point. Finding a clever way to get on top of a house or activate a holovator are puzzles on their own, and will always have a reward for you. My biggest complaint regarding exploration is the lack of surf, honestly. This is probably the first Pokemon game ever that doesn't let you get into the water, which makes no sense to me, mostly considering that there are wild zones that are literally split in half by canals. Speaking of them, the wild zones definitely feel like a work in progress as well, and maybe it's a negative result of having a more condensed map. They are definitely a bit smaller than I would like, and don't have as much biodiversity on them as one would expect. If not for shiny hunting, I would have very little incentive to go back to them after catching all their species, which takes no longer than 5 minutes. And while that does fit with the Quasarticle lore that I will be exploring later, I think lore should be adapted for a more fun gameplay and not the other way around. It's also a bummer that a few of the more strategy-driven approaches to catching Pokemon like smoke bombs and cakes are absent from this game because I loved using cakes for stealth catching in Arceus and I deeply miss them here. I actually had the most fun hunting for Pokemon outside of the wild zones, exploring rooftops and finding secret areas within the city. An example of one of my favorite early games hunt was wanting to add Gumi to my team, learning that it only spawned during rainy weather near to water sources, so every time that it would start raining in game, I would stop what I was doing and spend the following minutes mapping waterfront locations where I could find Gumi more often to set up a shiny hunt. Literally going in blind to figure out by trial and error how spawns work was one of my favorite experiences with Legends ZA. And to also mention some very welcome quality of life upgrades when compared to previous entries, like whoever worked the boxes and the multi-select tool in this game deserves a Nobel Prize. Thank you, Game Freak developer, thank you. Adjusting moves as you go is incredible. I have used the auto heal function more often than going to the Pokemon Center, and the ball collecting guy. Oh my god, this heaven sent man who grabs Pokeballs you missed all over town is everything, and for me is an example of an incredible Lumiose public service and definitely well spent tax Poké dollars. As a big fan of Legends Arceus, my biggest expectations was for the return of the side quests, which also helped populate Jubilife Village. The side stories in ZA are filled with charm and are so funny. From taking a Slurpuff on a coffee date to joining a Starmie cult that praises our alien overlords, or suddenly getting a random fashion makeover, hearing NPCs walking around Lumiose talking about how they too are hunting for shiny alphas is what helped to make this city feel so fun to be in. One mission to activate a Holovator requires you to help a construction worker who has 4 Beldum, and later in the game when you run across him again, they all have evolved into Metang. This is a city that is always changing with things that are happening while you are not looking, and it feels like every single NPC is going through their own silly little adventures. The care is always in the details, like many Pokemon that got new models and animations. From the new colors on Shiny Slowpoke to now Machamp hitting that same pose she does in her Sugimori art. Details like the fact that every single Nurse Joy in the game has a name and have night hobbies and life outside of work. You can battle them at night in the ZA Royale. As well as battling ball collecting guy who is actually called Leandro. These are examples of small world building touches that charmed me in my playthrough. The highlight is of course the side quest of the Spupa in the museum, which is by itself the biggest love letter ever to fans of Pokémon Legends Arceus and fans of Pokémon X and Y. Literally displaying Pokémon artwork inspired by real life artistic movement styles that will make that intersection of Pokémon nerds and art history majors go wild. I also need to mention, the artwork hanging on the walls of this game is going so hard. From the decorations in Hotel Z, to Canari's bedroom, and even the advertisements spread out across Lumiose. Oh, hi Among Us. Speaking of art, do I need to talk about the music in this game? Banger after banger after banger with incredible big band jazz renditions of classic Pokémon X and Y themes. I think Game Freak must have approached the same insane musicians Nintendo talked to for the soundtrack of Mario Kart World and said, go crazy with it. And when I say that this game has a lot of care for fans, I'm also taking into account that a Pokémon fan himself was invited to work on these arrangements. Composer and content creator Insane in the Rain, and I honestly need to give props to Game Freak for giving this insane level of professional exposure of millions of people to a fan of the franchise. My only complaint here is that I wish they would have gone with a more minimalistic and chill approach for the Lumiose Night theme, just like Breath of the Wild. It is an incredible song, but it's very agitated and busy, even if you're not in a battle area. Sometimes you want nights to be calmer and a bit more introspective. This energetic tune does feel old fast if you are shiny hunting, for example, and keep on hearing it for hours and hours on end. And finally, the shiny new thing ZA brings to the table, and the main selling point of this game is the real-time battle system, a feature that appeals to the competitive side of Pokémon fans. It's an upgrade from the turn-based battles into something that feels a lot more like what we see in the Pokémon anime, and that is by no means a new idea. I remember growing up, when I was 10 or so, I would play a lot of fan Pokémon adventures which would mix tabletop roleplay with a real-time battle system, and this has been something that has been widely requested ever since I can remember. I think that with a really well-established and fleshed out VGC scene over the past decades, it has never been this difficult for Pokémon to escape the turn-based gameplay. It's a bold move to try something new and leave an entire competitive scene unattended for. And now that we finally know that more than time travel or alternative remakes, the Legends series is about stories left untold and experimenting with new gameplay ideas, this feels like the perfect way to try it out. And you know, just like the Arceus catching system has slowly been integrated into the main series, I think that if this battle system is seen as a success, we can definitely see it slowly being implemented as well. And honestly, I did enjoy playing it a lot, and I wouldn't mind seeing it keep getting more and more fleshed out in the future. Pokémon was never a super challenging game, and I still think ZA isn't. This is still a gameplay style that allows you to have an overleveled starter and roll over every single enemy using nothing more than damaging moves. But it has made many supporting moves much more relevant in a regular playthrough than ever before. I found myself using a Protect and Fire Spin combo, something that I had never attempted in any of the 9 previous generations, and my cutie unevolved Fennekin picked up some crazy KOs against literal mega Pokemon. The new system might not be everyone's cup of tea, and there is definitely a learning curve to it. Pokemon fans that are used to really thinking their movements before they act, checking type matchups, running damage calculations, will be pressed to act on their feet with this one. Having to consider the typing of your enemy and switching in between coverages, immunities, and type priorities quickly, because if you take too long to make a decision, you will get hit by a Hyper Beam to the face. And be sure, if you only have one super effective move against a specific Pokemon, your opponent will press Protect at the exact moment you decide to use it, forcing you to only hit it with your other moves that might not be very effective while your main move cooldowns. And while I do think this style makes for a more exciting and engaging single-player playthrough, I still prefer the traditional, fleshed-out, chess-like and complex turn-based style for multiplayer and official competitive play. I have not explored much with the ranked battles yet, but from what I've seen, people are using crazy teleport tech and screens that look like they came straight out of the anime in a few clips, and I'm sure there's so much more to explore that I didn't even scratch the surface yet. And of course, you also have the Mega Rogue battles, which basically take Legends Arceus Noble Pokemon fights and ramp them up to 11. I find it really cool how each Pokemon will have a unique and different fighting style you will have to figure out mid-fight. Banette will create Shadow Clones, while Frostlass will attack with Unavoidable Blizzard, and Barbanaka will just outright try to delete you from existence by means of punches. While fun and challenging, I did think that doing 3 of them in a row every time that I wanted to climb a rank got a bit tiresome, and I wish there were a few optional ones saved for the post-game, even if I don't see how that would make sense for the story. Now that the basic gameplay features are covered for, I want to talk about the second big group that Pokemon has to make sure are attended to: the younger fans. Pokemon needs to keep presenting itself to younger players to stay relevant in the future, and looking at my little cousin, who is 10 and obsessed with TCG cards, I understand why it is crucial to grab the attention of younger kids and convert them to the mainline games. And I know this is a much more challenging task today than it was in the 90s. Consoles are losing popularity, and gaming for kids is mostly happening through very accessible mobile and platform-agnostic games, like Roblox or Fortnite. It doesn't help that Pokémon Legends ZA is not available in the language that my little cousin speaks, Brazilian Portuguese, because to get Gen Alphas into a Pokémon game, it is really a war for attention. Some of these kids may have never picked up a home console before, let alone a full-on JRPG, and they have many more options today than they did in 1996. All that to say, I understand why it's important to have comprehensive tutorials and make sure that these kids are 100% able to enjoy the game, but my biggest complaint about Legends ZA is that Game Freak really needs to learn how to make their tutorials less of a chore. The second hour of this game dragged on so much, and if you look at my stream when I started playing it, you will basically see me constantly begging Urbane to let me go out in the streets and buy clothes that are not a fedora. This was also true for other streamers I watched play the game, as well as many other people on social media. People were outright believing this game was boring until we were set free into Lumiose and were able to explore it freely. This was also the exact same case with Legends Arceus and Scarlet and Violet. Game Freak doesn't trust that players will learn the game as they play. Many other mechanics are explained through side missions, such as held items or berries. I'm not a game designer, but there must be a better way to make sure everyone is up to speed without being an active impairment to the experience. The final group I want to talk about here, and according to our friend Jeremy from a few minutes ago, the main one, is the girls and the gays. For us, the gaming environment can be really hostile, especially if you try to exist in voice chats or YouTube comments. Self-expression and identity are absolutely fundamental to feeling welcome in a gaming community, and to genuinely connecting to it. You see this clearly in series that are widely popular among this demographic, such as The Sims or Animal Crossing. In this aspect, I honestly believe Legends ZA has knocked it out of the park. In a second, I will explore how that shows itself in the diversity of the secondary characters you meet in Lumiose, but that is definitely also true for the protagonist. You can make them into whoever you want. The possibilities for hairstyles, balayage, combining different outfits and eye colors, that's what makes every single Lumiose adventure unique and special. And the clothes are not gender-locked, which might sound like a smaller issue for many people, but has been one of the most celebrated decisions by my community over at this side of the internet. You are free to create whichever character you desire with an overwhelming selection of clothes from the beginning of the game, from suits to skirts. There was a bit of discussion about the skirts and why they are there, but I'm positive it's because we are playing with a presumably underage character in a game with a lot of dodging and rolling and free camera movement in photo mode. And yes, there are those people, there are always those people. Also, a follower of the channel called Tenta Sato pointed out to me that in the classic Japanese Pokemon theme song, there is a verse about searching for Pokemon far and wide, even under girls' skirts. Yes, I know, the 90s. So that might as well be a way to directly prevent people from trying to be funny about that line. But anyway, if you look at the many selfies people have been sharing online of their original characters, it's joyfully difficult to find someone playing with a character similar to yours. We all live in a Pokemon world, and we are all unique in this Pokemon world. Throughout this video, I have been sharing some photos that friends and followers of the channel have sent my way to showcase the many different ways to have a Lumiose adventure, like Blue Vex's upside down shiny bat and Psyche's concussion misfortune. Although I love the photo mode and I did stop my game in many important moments simply to take a photo, while I think that many things have improved from Scarlet and Violet, it also feels like a step back from Legends Arceus in many ways. Arceus made it so easy to organize your team of Pokemon all around you and they would just stay there and allow you to take a great photo. In ZA, the only way you can take a picture of your entire team is by sitting on a bench and, hear me, your Pokemon will almost never be in the same frame as you. You have no control to where they wander to, and if there is any wall involved, just forget it. You are not taking that picture. Also, I'm not sure if that was just me, but 7 out of 10 times when I would use music to pose my Pokemon, they would glitch and stay on that same pose forever, regardless if I changed the music back or not, and I literally had to reset my game to reset their pose. Also, the Mega Evolution timer stays running when you are in photo mode, which makes it virtually impossible to take good pictures with your Mega Evolved partners. And those are things that really disappointed me because I feel like they worked so nicely in previous games. Why change? Also, insane that there is no Rotom phone or Mega Ring customization in this game, taking into account everything else we can customize, mostly when we have a huge close-up of the phone before every single ranked match. And also the fact that every single character in the game has a cooler Mega Ring than us. But to sum it up, there are many ways to play this game. In the first hours online, it was really funny to see what players were trying to do first. Some players who are mostly drawn to the competitive aspect of Pokemon, such as Moxie Boosted or Wolf Glick, went straight into experimenting with the ranked in-game ladder. Other notable members of the ever-impressive Full Odds community set out to build a complete shiny team before even touching the story. Some people like me spent all their money on clothes. Every Pokemon fan, regardless of what drives them to the franchise, has had their own individual Pokemon adventure. But to circle it back, through all I discussed, we have a defined world, a gameplay loop, and a self-insert protagonist. And the thing about self-insert protagonists is that it's difficult to tell a story through them. Compelling stories usually demand that a character goes through an arc, demands that characters develop and grow as they explore the world around them, in engaging and thought-provoking ways. It's hard to have that when the protagonist is a silent and subjective you. For much of the early Pokemon games, people have criticized the story simplicity until about Gen 5. That's when Game Freak understood that to tell a really engaging story, the one who has to go through a growth arc isn't the player, it's all the characters around it. It's by being inspired by your skill and connection to Pokemon that characters like Silver and Wally grow into the best versions of themselves. That was fully realized with characters like Anne, Hugh, or Lily, who by interacting, battling, and being inspired by your way of playing the game, can go through arcs of their own and push the story forward. There is a talking point about Black and White or Sun and Moon that I agree partially, saying that these characters are the real protagonists of the story because, at the end, the events revolve around them. On the other hand, you have the extreme success of Scarlet and Violet's story because it presents its plot through 3 compelling, distinct arcs, featuring characters that reflect different ways players might engage with the game: Nemona, Penny, and Arven. The reason why I believe Legends ZA does this better than any Pokemon game before is that they are able to do that masterfully at least 8 different times. Not only with who the traditional rival would be, Urbane or Tawny, depending on which pronoun they are vibing with in your playthrough, but also with the secondary characters who each have their own small story and arc for each promotion match. More on them later. I will be using Urbane to refer to Urbane and Tawny in this video because that's the name they chose for my playthrough, but I think they are a super interesting character. More than that, Urbane is hilarious and I love him. In previous Pokemon games, there was this feeling that yes, maybe Lily or Anne were the true protagonists because the story revolved around them. Urbane spins that situation around because instead of having the story turn around him, he suffers from main character syndrome and demands that the plot revolves around him, even when it doesn't. He arrives in Lumiose to look for a lost relative he doesn't talk much about, who is definitely not his mom, and the fact that he wears her jacket all the time is but a coincidence, and then is taken in by AZ. He feels for the poor old man living alone in that hotel, so he takes as a personal goal to help Hotel Z become a success. Most of the time during the story, Urbane is off either working with Emma to find the person who's not his mom, or to create failed social media ads for Hotel Z. He's often being secretive, ghosting us, getting caught in the middle of protests, taking loans from loan sharks, lol, and getting caught in many misadventures. And at the end, he ends up at rank A, just like that, and we never saw any of that happen. He does silly stuff all the time, but is really charismatic and is far from being a perfect friend. But as leader of Team MZ, he feels like he's being the protagonist of his own Pokemon story that we are only catching glimpses of. He has such main character syndrome that in the finale of the game, he demands a fight with you to determine who is the strongest Mega Evolution user, and will be the one to help Floette save the day. This is one of the few fights in the game that you can win or lose, and the story will continue the same way. If he wins, he is crowned strongest Mega Evolution user and takes Floette into the tower to stop the crisis. If he loses, he says, screw it, and asks you to let him take Floette into the tower anyway. He is the leader and the protagonist of his story, like a Pokémon Legends Urbane or Pokémon Legends Tawny, and I think that is a neat way to let the player feel like there is so much more going on in Lumiose we only get glimpses of. And there is always much more going on in Lumiose. In my playthrough, I was really disappointed when I saw my character jumping from rank V straight up to rank F, skipping 15 ranks. What I thought was going to be a challenging climb for hours on end looked like a cheap plot device to reduce my story to only 6 more battles. But dear stranger online, how wrong I was. Because these 6 more battles were actually 12 and kind of 17, and they hold the entire heart of Pokémon Legends ZA. Instead of fighting basic characters like the arch nemesis of public transportation, Zack or Zavi, that kid, I don't even remember what his deal was. Instead, ZA decides to scale it down. Not a whole region of battles, but a small, concise map of personal stories, focusing on a handful of characters only, all interconnected amongst themselves and incredibly fleshed out. The 15 rank climbs that were skipped are left as an option for later, for the endgame, and are the exact number of ranks you need to climb to receive AZ's Floette in the postgame. But for now, the game decides we will focus on an engaging story, with characters that are all teased at the beginning of the game. You hear about them like rumors or whispers in the streets of this busy city, but before you're even allowed to face them and climb the ranks of the ZA Royale, you get caught up in their personal life to really get to know them as people, with their own friends, partners, quests, and moral ambiguities. You get to care for them, understand their motives, and why they love and need to protect Lumiose City. Also, all of these fleshed out stories kind of sound strangely queer-coded to me. I don't know, maybe this is personal bias because when immersing in a game like this, I'm not a passive agent looking to the code references, I'm creating meaning by bringing along my understanding of the world and experiences and identity, but it could also circle back a bit to Game Freak being very aware of who their audience is. I'm not here to say who's 100% queer or not, I'm just briefly stating that there are funny patterns to see. And also to say that what you choose headcanon is valid. But anyway, getting to know who these characters are as people instead of just, hi, I'm Zack and it's my dream to start a taxi monopoly makes them so much more interesting than just fighting battle after battle after battle, and honestly, that is probably my favorite part of the entire game. And I'm not sure if that's a common hot take that everyone realized immediately, so bear with me. Still, I find it super interesting how every one of these matches, Canari, Ivor, Corbeau, and Jacinthe, the trainers who are kind of playing the role of gym leader in the game, they have each another trainer as a counterpart, and Both thematically within the story and in battle dynamic matchups, they all use types that are immune to the one used by the ranked match trainer: Electric and Ground, Fighting and Ghost, Poison and Steel, Dragon and Fairy. That type immunity appears as a narrative device, either to show companionship, support, abuse, or yes, toxic Yuri, and Pokemon was never this clever in using game mechanics for its own storytelling before. Our rank E match is against Canari, who is an electric type streamer, and her grandfather, Tarragon, who specializes in ground types. Canari is one of the first characters we see in-game, as the protagonist watches her stream upon arriving in Lumiose. In my first playthrough, I literally thought it was Yono, and yes, it is a bit funny that they gave us 2 electric streamers in a row, but that's where the similarities end. Canari lives her life online, has a gamer chair back pose, and thrives on voltage and attention, electrifying her audience. It seems like the entire city is obsessed with her, the Dynamo fan club with its fair share of fanatics, including Team MZ's Naveen, who knows all the trivia and will not tolerate anyone making fun of her. Almost like how many Pokemon fans are also huge Hatsune Miku aficionados, this idea of a Vocaloid hologram is also used by the story. Her grandfather, Tarragon, is literally the only person who can ground her, an engineer who understands the circuitry behind her fame. Electric can't touch ground, and that's the point. Tarragon uses the love and care he has for his granddaughter to shield her from all this electric attention, and even assumes her own identity in a drag-like performance to keep fans engaged, while this introvert girl can focus on what she really loves: her games. Our rank D match is against Ivor, and this one must be one of my favorite side quests in the entire game. Ivor is the biggest himbo there ever was and the head of an organization called the Fist of Justice, which believes that wild zones shouldn't be a thing at all, that people and Pokemon should live together side by side without walls or segregation. They are basically an activist group opposing Quasartico's urban redevelopment plan. The Fist's whole deal is use strength as justice, tearing down the literal and metaphorical barriers between humans and Pokemon by punching through them. They train in public, stage fights to raise awareness, and oftentimes go a little overboard. Ivor has a habit of solving political problems with his fists. Ivor is a fighting type specialist, and his sister Gwen, as a ghost type specialist, is the only person who is immune to his brute strength. She is the one who needs to bear the burden of cleaning his reckless mess, keep the movement organized, and prevent the city from feeling too many noise complaints. Until one day she goes missing, and we go with the best detective ever, Emma, for a detective MacGuffin chase to look for her. And I'm sorry, but this is so queer-coded, I just cannot. Gwen has an entire secret life that her family doesn't know about, a secret hideout in the sewers, and is often meeting and sharing secrets with her really good friend Canari. Look at them, they are such good friends, and we can only fix this family drama that shouldn't be solved by a detective by doxing a streamer, outing a potentially queer couple, and going down a sewer. At the end, Gwen is simply overwhelmed by her brother and is the one thing in his life Ivor can't punch his way through. And that's made really obvious when he tries to punch through an illusion ghost wall in the sewers of the game. He may be strong, but without her help, Ivor is truly helpless. The solution we find is to have his sister coach him, because only through teamwork can we truly progress. And Ivor agrees to stop battling through the day to stop scaring people, because you can only achieve true change through organization. Our rank C match is Corbeau, and oh my god, Corbeau, my short king! As I mentioned before, I was really shocked when Urbane got himself involved with loan sharks, put depth on Team MZ's back and a target on our legs. And there I was in the middle of my Pokemon game, forced to work for the Yakuza if their leader was Garrett Way from My Chemical Romance camp. But as it has been common for Game Freak to have evil team as a red herring in recent games, the Rust Syndicate was simply not just a discount Team Rocket, but actually an organization for Corbeau to help citizens of Lumiose by unofficial methods. It's the most polite mafia of all time, which has as their main operational methods legally binding contracts and loaning money to kids so they can repay their debts by doing mandatory community service. They are never violent against citizens, and after proving their worth, Corbeau basically forgives Urbane's debt, indirectly so they can still keep their tough facade. Corbeau is but a hot criminal with a heart of gold who never wanted to be a boss but was anointed by Felipe. And he also flirts a lot with you, the player, specifically. And I simply can't. Then we learn of Corbeau's not queer-coded at all backstory of being abandoned as a child, growing up without a family, and having to fend off for himself, as he develops a new identity. He is held by Lysandre and has to survive in the underworld of Lumiose by using his wit and incredible battle skills. In these rough streets, you need to look tough and mean, but at the end of the day, the Syndicate's fundamental mission is to look after any citizen who needs help. As a poison-type specialist, only Steel is immune to him, and that is his right-hand man, Felipe. There is a dialogue in the game that says word for word that Steel can't be poisoned. See, that's true even for people. Word is that back when he was young, our very own Felipe was awed by an even younger man, Corbeau. The thing about Corbeau is that he's charismatic, charming, just downright intoxicating, and that's rad, but it can work against him too. So Felipe looks to Skarmory as a reminder. It helps him keep a level head and stops him from just blindly following Corbeau. I fully get that, Felipe. I mean, odd, charming, intoxicating. Very heterosexual to me. Anyway, according to Felipe himself, in my childhood years, I was already formidable in my physical strength and in my talent for battles. As such, I was able to keep the local roughnecks under control and under my command. But I was still nothing but a young fool. I was strong, yes, but that did not put food on the table. It was only thanks to Mr. Lysandre's support that I managed to survive those days. That was not the case for Mr. Corbeau. He negotiated with Lysandre himself, convincing the man to give him seed money for his ventures. Mr. Corbeau started up all sorts of business such as security services and Pokemon couriers, and even some things that perhaps were not entirely above board. He bested us completely, and in an area entirely unrelated to Pokemon battles. Ever since then, he has been the only person I call my boss. The Rust Syndicate Moral Greatness is fundamental in understanding both the role of Lysandre, Team Flare Nouveau, and Quasarticle, so we will come back to this, but I think that the missions we conduct for them, be it kicking ghost Pokemon away from a recently rented apartment, or needing to protect Jet, Quasarticle CEO, from a homeowners association protest, are key to understanding the main team of ZA. These are protesters who are seeing their homes rezoned, their neighborhoods are being converted, and the safety of their property is being undermined by the Wild Zone presence. Reddit posts call this Poké-gentrification. The Rust Syndicate and the Feast of Justice are basically on opposite sides here. One helping to keep Pokemon away, the other fighting for integration, and this all comes to play when understanding Quasarticle's role in the story. We will get there in a second, because first, we need to talk about the billionaire and the forced maid. Jacinthe is probably the most discussed character in this game for good and bad reasons, and I think this is a fascinating story, and I still don't know what to make of the whole maid situation we got going on. Jacinthe is a millionaire high-class socialite, leader of the unbearably posh Society of Battle Connoisseurs, the ace trainers of Lumiose. I think it might even be a direct reference to French nobility, and let them eat cake Marie Antoinette like disconnection from the working class people. She cannot hear no for an answer and will stalk you until you fulfill her narcissistic desires to participate in her fancy tournament in a 5-star hotel, sponsored by the mayor of Lumiose. And her maid lesbian, Lebain, is someone who lost the fight against Jacinthe in the past and now has to serve her as a maid. It's clearly an unequal relationship between the two. Lebain says she's bound to Jacinthe because of a promise she made after being defeated. As she puts it, years ago I got totally annihilated on battle by Jacinthe, and I'm still paying for it. Now I talk fancy and wear this crazy getup, all because I promised her I would. Lebain is by nature aggressive, impulsive, and competitive, and might have been a person who created trouble herself. Ivor, our himbo, even states that the reason why he's so strong is because he was literally traumatized by Lebain in the past. Lebain here was the reason I started my strict training regimen. She beat me in a fight when we were children, and later adds, now that I'm stronger, I thought I could defeat Lebain and thus heal from my past trauma. That gives a hint that Jacinthe's domination might also be a way to protect those around Lebain from her own aggressiveness. Someone who says, I like settling fights with my Pokemon and my fists. Jacinthe, with her prowess and influence, is the one who manages to tame Lebane and replace rebellion with poise and subservience. Lebane says that by fighting with the protagonist, she feels freer and remembers how she used to be before Lady Jacinthe came along. Lebane is a dragon specialist, and Jacinthe is a fairy-type trainer who is immune to her raw power, and she behaves basically like an evil fae from a folk tale. Feminine and delicate on the outside, but will maniacally haunt you if she doesn't have her way. This is a really intriguing dynamic for me because it's really nuanced, but my favorite analysis is definitely from Twitter user @CorichiCeleste. They write that, the more I look, the more I realize their relationship is just a metaphor for fairy types' introduction to the metagame and how that affected dragon types. Lebane struggles to fight alongside Jacinthe because she knows she'll lose, but she doesn't inherently shy away from it. She's upholding her promise more so for the sake of her own honor as a trainer than out of obligation. Jacinthe, on the other hand, likes having her around. That is her right-hand woman after all. Wild. And last but not least, we have the only pair of characters that use the same type in battle. And it couldn't be any different. Our hipster coffee baristas, Grisham and Grizel. If the ranked battles represent gym leaders and the Super Tornado Jacinthe is almost like an Elite Four, then Grisham and Grizel are Legends ZA champions. As the heads of Team Flare Nouveau, they are both fire-type specialists, but they differ in interesting ways. If you pay attention, you will see that their fire is really different from one another. Grizel is impulsive and fiery and wants to get things done quickly. Her entire team is caught in quick balls. Grisham is deliberate, methodical, a slow burner who fights using only timer balls. That is, using game mechanics as a storytelling device. The moral grayness of them trying to revive or redeem the name of a basically supremacist organization is what drives them. I read a really interesting Reddit thread discussing that instead of straightforward villains, Team Flare Nouveau are the children of a fallen ideology. They were raised in the shadow of the original Team Flare, when Lysandre was still a respected philanthropist, inventing holotech and funding public welfare. Look at Corbeau and Philippe, for example, who were abandoned children, helped by and who still have a complex relationship to Lysandre, the person who helped them get out of the streets and into safety. For Grisham and Grizel, Team Flare was never a terrorist group, it was the place that fed them, taught them, and gave them meaning. In-game, they say, Team Flare provided a place for people to come together, to achieve a more beautiful world. Lysandre pushed it too far, but they believe in the propaganda and the promises of beauty and order as a way to help the less fortunate people in Lumiose. Saying things like, at Nouveau Café, we've worked hard to provide coffee to those who have little else. We understand the city better than anyone else. Now they are trying to rebuild something good from the ashes, help and feed the people of Lumiose through affordable coffee chains, but unable to see that they are kinda standing on supremacist roots. They believe the ideology was good, it was Lysandre's or AZ's fault, why it deviated into a path they disagree, almost tainting the name of something they genuinely believe to be good. If we can be the ones to protect Lumiose, then people will finally see us differently, echoing something that Gwyn also says about the Fist of Justice. It's honestly a very interesting discussion for a Pokemon game, and it's not very different from kids who grew up in a cult. These are all of our battles between Rank A and Rank F, and I think they are fascinating. To hear, engage, and participate in these stories in a row is probably the core of what made me enjoy ZA so much. But there are a couple more characters to talk about, and what is probably the biggest plot twist in the game, well, Grisham and Grizel's cult leader is still here. The last time we saw Lysandre, he was trying to use the ultimate weapon to commit a little bit of genocide. As is the case with every fascist, he wasn't as smart as the fellas and he ended up shooting the ultimate weapon straight up. Like 90 degrees up. And the shot fell back on his head. We assumed getting hit in the face by a genocide machine would mean it's Jover, but surprise surprise, Lysandre walks out with a bad case of amnesia, a broken man with the same expanded lifespan as AZ had. The way the ultimate weapon operates is a little bit strange lore-wise. It's both biological and mechanical, using the same energy that causes Mega Evolution to happen and powers both Xerneas, the bringer of life, and Yveltal, the harbinger of death. The X and Y axis of this same life power that can create and end life. This creates a very clear parallel between Lysandre and AZ, the two characters who did fire this horrible weapon, a choice that was driven by opposing motives. AZ to restore life to his beloved Floette, Lysandre to shape his ethnostate. These two are people who have objectively done bad things and are looking to redeem themselves. AZ out of regret, Lysandre out of a literal memory loss. And a really important theme that is discussed around these characters is how to achieve forgiveness after doing something so terrible. ZA seems to say that for these characters it doesn't matter how much you changed as a person or if you have been plagued by regret for 3,000 years. The consequences are still there, and the only way to make it right is to take concrete action to fix things. AZ tries to do this by creating Ange, which I think could be better explained by the game, but it's, in some way, an antithesis to the ultimate weapon, interwoven with the Prism Tower in the center of Lumiose City. Ange's goal is to use the same power that causes death in the ultimate weapon to bring life instead. Bless the people and Pokémon of Lumiose with the same life and protection that had been granted to Floette, but it needed the power of its eternal flower to be activated. When Lysandre fired the ultimate weapon, Ange got supercharged with that same energy, and that's what makes the events of the story unfold. Ange is almost leaking this life and death energy, causing Mega Crystals to spawn all over the town, and Rogue Mega Evolution to spread throughout the city. But a device that grants too much life is as dangerous as a device that causes death, and that's the entire plot around Ange. AZ tried to seek redemption by doing the exact opposite of what he did first, but that has also backfired on him. Only through seeking balance and coexistence can life thrive, and that is Zygarde's entire deal with the story. According to the Pokédex, it's hypothesized that Zygarde is monitoring those who destroy the ecosystem from deep in a cave where it lives. When all of its cells have been gathered together, it uses force to neutralize those who harm the ecosystem. The legendary Pokémon and protector of balance uses Lysandre's Clean Slate to achieve its full form and stop Ange from going rogue, but it still needs a strong trainer to help it Mega Evolve. Ange going rogue is a result both of AZ's regret and wish for forgiveness and Lysandre's deeds of firing the weapon. And it doesn't matter how much they regret their actions, the both of them have to atone for what they did. AZ with the help of Team NZ, Lysandre with the help of Zygarde, and that build-up comes together in an incredible conclusion that masterfully ties together every single plot point the story has laid down so far. But before we jump into the conclusion, I have to take a tangent here because there is a really important plot point for the endgame of Legends ZA that I haven't explored yet. We will have to address the elephant in the room. The anti-homeless benches. Yes, we are at the plot twist of my video, dear Stranger Line. They are probably the most important clue when analyzing this game, and it couldn't have been any different. They have been literally making headlines since the first trailer. I have seen a few reviews saying that ZA doesn't really have a villain or an evil team, and that Game Freak has chosen to play with your expectations. You would expect the Rust Syndicate to be villains, but they protect citizens. You would expect the Fist of Justice to be twist villains, but they are simply driven by himbo energy. Well, if it isn't Dynamo as well, so is the villain Lysandre? With the memory loss? The last missing candidate is Quasartico Inc., but we, the protagonists, are literally working for them. They can't be the villains. What a boring game, huh? It seems there's no story at all if there are no villains in it. Except, you have to be quite evil to put benches like that all over town. Mostly when you are leading an urban redevelopment plan to create a city that belongs to people and Pokemon. Specifically in a game where one of the cover art protagonists is Emma. Someone who literally started her story as a kid surviving through homelessness, growing to dedicate her life to the small people of the city. In X and Y, she lived in dark alleyways among the people left behind by Lumiose. In ZA, she's the only one who still sees them. The side quests that allow us to know the silly little people living their silly little lives in this city, they are Emma's side quests. While Quasartico pushes progress and development in the city deaf to the protests of little people, Emma dedicates her life to ensure that no one gets left behind. Because she never forgets she comes from a dark alleyway, sharing a bench with Mimi. But like, Quasartico can't be the villains. We would have noticed. We are working for them. They are a respectable corporation working hard to reach their goal of Pokemon and people living in perfect harmony, but they haven't given a second thought about the benches? Well, dear stranger online, Legends ZA is a game about the housing crisis, and the villains here are undoubtedly Quasartico. Also the mayor of Lumiose, but mostly Quasartico. It is a really subtle way to put it, but it is all in the text of the game. Yes, we have been working for them all the time, and they are never explicitly called evil by any of the characters. And I honestly think that plays into Urbane's naivete because there are so many clear indicators that that is the case. Starting with you and your friends in Team MZ. You all live in a hotel. Why is that? Paris, alongside many other cities in Europe and North America, is going through an unprecedented housing crisis driven by high demand, limited supply, and soaring prices. Even earning above average wages in Paris won't guarantee you decent accommodation. And you and your friends, in one way or another, are going through the same thing in Lumiose City. If not for the kindness in the heart of this 3,000-year-old magic king, you wouldn't really have a place to stay in Lumiose. Lita, for example, moved to Lumiose City because she got a scholarship in a dance school and was living in a shared flat with a roommate, which, as someone who moved to Europe when I was fresh out of college, sounds like a really familiar situation. Her roommate signed on with a talent agency and moved out of the apartment, and Lita literally says textually that she wouldn't be able to pay rent on her own. She is lucky enough to find Hotel Z, and this isn't really asked textually but leaves us wondering, why is rent so high in Lumiose City? Naveen, a character who I genuinely couldn't tell the pronouns of when I first saw them, is someone who my chat fell in love with because of how relatable for queer people his story is. He is an introverted nerd who slowly grows more comfortable around his new friends to show his true colors. Someone who is obsessed with Twitch streamers or VTubers and isn't afraid to show love for their hobby. Naveen was born in Lumiose and lived with their grandmother, who hated the idea that he had such a big interest in fashion and threw away all of their sewing supplies to ensure Naveen could focus on studying. After this, Naveen runs away from home, wandering Lumiose until finding Hotel Z, being welcomed and finding a chosen family of his own. Team MZ is that, a chosen family of people who were displaced by Quasartico's redevelopment, of kids filled with dreams and goals trying to make a home in a city that refuses to provide them with one. And they find this community thanks to AZ, Lumiose's living memory, a man who once tried to resurrect his world through death. And when he opens Hotel Z to strangers, it isn't just kindness, it's guilt for having laid the foundations for the crisis all of them are going through. The same guilt that drives Lysandre in a city that changed so much. AZ stays as, quite literally, the only form of public housing left in Lumiose. After 3,000 years of mistakes, the least he can offer these kids is a home. If not for community, if not for AZ, Lita, Naveen, and arguably you, the player, would be left homeless because of Quasartico. In the final visit you make to their HQ, Jet admits very openly that Quasartico's redevelopment plan exists only to keep rent prices as high as possible. After the ultimate weapon devastated Kalos, Lumiose's population fled and rents plummeted, so the mayor of Lumiose was looking for a company who would prevent that from happening again. A risky venture, she says, so Quasartico stepped in, branding itself as rebuilding for harmony between people and Pokemon, but the company's main goal here is economic, not ecological. If rogue Mega Evolutions scare residents away, property prices will collapse. When Jet is being directly confronted by the Homeowners Association and being accused of being directly responsible for the Pokemon moving to the city in the first place, things get aggressive and you and Corbeau have to intervene to protect Urbane. But after that, there is a bit of a confrontation against Jet. Is there any truth to what they were accusing her of? Jet replies in PR, saying that what is true is that we at Quasartico Inc. aim to make Lumiose into a place where people and Pokemon will coexist in harmony. However, we also know it is unreasonable to simply dream we can live alongside wild Pokemon with no protections needed. Our whole strategy includes the wild zones to keep Lumiose's people safe, though I also hope that someday removing all such walls between us, which we know for a fact is not her true goal at all. And if that wasn't enough, the final conversation with Jet, when we ask if it's true that what's causing Pokemon to flock to Lumiose is somehow a plot by Quasartico, she gives the least subtle side-eye of all time to Vinny, to then only reply, of course that's incorrect. Like, come on, that's why Quasartico isn't listening to the Homeowners Association. It makes sense that the wild zones are very small, with not many diverse species spawning in there. Biodiversity is not the goal. That's why the benches have aggressive architecture, so that undesired people or undesired Pokemon can't sleep there. Real, true coexistence was never Quasartico's business goal. Their only and main goal, the reason why the mayor of Lumiose hired them, is to keep rent prices up. This power working in the background, this mayor that is never seen or named, is the one coordinating everything. Either by hiring Quasartico to maintain rent prices, negotiating directly with Jacinthe in secret dinners to give her the permits to throw her lavish tournaments and keep her needs met, or offering a plea deal to Mabel, the evil scientist, who would be in jail if she wasn't essential to keep this entire system running. Legends ZA has a surprisingly mature and indirect plot going on in the background, having the player unknowingly partnering and aiding these powers that are never directly addressed or condemned. The elites, the businesses, and the politicians. It's up to you to make the connection that at the end, just like it often happens in real life, you are directly reinforcing a system that risks leaving you and your friends homeless. I mean, it's nothing revolutionary, but I do think it's a surprisingly mature and as progressive of a message as it can get for the world's most profitable franchise, right? Am I crazy? Like, Jet says word for word that the reason why Quasartico is doing the urban redevelopment plan is to keep rents high, and that is the literal direct reason why you and your friends find community due to not being able to afford a place to live. I think that, other than making Jet a mustache-twirling villain, it can't get more direct than that. Like, the side-eye to Vinny, there's no way. In the game where the box art main character was someone who literally lived on the streets? In the end, I think this is all fundamental in tying all the stories together, and why ZA has one of the most incredible finales in Pokemon history. Because at the end, when Ange goes rogue, who are the people who really care about the city? Who shows up to help you save Urbane, your friends Floette, and everyone else? Vinny ditches first minute to go back to HQ and strategize, leaving the entire situation to be fixed by the outsourced kids who can't afford rent. Jet is most definitely nowhere to be seen, and the mayor? Haha! In the end, in true Avengers Endgame fashion, the people who come together to defend Lumiose are all of these complicated, morally grey characters, people from all walks of life we have gotten close in the past few hours of gameplay. Canari and Tarragon, Gwyn and Ivor, Corbeau and Felipe, Jacinthe and Lebane, AZ and Emma, Tim MZ, Lysandre, and Zygarde. They all have many different ties that connect them to the city. Maybe they have a strong connection to the people. Maybe it's where they do their craft. Maybe they dedicate their lives to help its citizens, or feed them, or help them become better trainers, or wish to liberate the Pokemon living there. Maybe they are acting out of guilt and regret, but they show up and are here to protect Lumiose. This cinematic ending, pumped up by the orchestral and fabulous soundtrack, creates a sense of epicness and proportion that has never been seen in Pokemon before, rushing through the streets you already know so well that now are presented completely differently. Putting to test everything you learned about Mega Evolution and the new system of real-time battles and your traversal parkour skills, you meet each of these characters again, one for one, and see how you, the player, have pushed them to grow as characters and as trainers. And once you finally reach Zygarde to face the terrifying Audrey 2, you are definitely worthy enough to be its trainer and do what you didn't manage to do in Pokemon X and Y, to finally stop the ultimate weapon for good. And hear me, this finale would have hit even harder with voice acting. It's kind of funny, playing this on stream and reading every line out loud, but it's very tragic also. It could have elevated the story so much more. We have had voice acting in Detective Pikachu and Master ZX, so it's not a technical issue. According to Sword and Shield interviews with Shigeru Omori, it's a deliberate choice to preserve that timeless storybook feel of Pokemon. As he puts it, if you've got a voice on that character, that instantly provides to the player an image, a feel for that character that they don't generate themselves. It's pushed on them from the development side. Whereas if we have really flavorful text for those characters but no voice, the players can kind of create their own image of who that character is as they're playing. And that's something we really like to encourage. Still, at moments like this, that rule of prioritizing imagination over immersion feels unfortunately dated and hinders the story from hitting even harder. On a secondary note, I absolutely love when the climax of a Pokemon game makes a fun and creative use of menus. Integrating a passive game UI change in the story is such a clever strategy to make an RPG feel more lived in. Just like in Scarlet and Violet when all your Pokeballs are locked and the only button you can press is your sweet ride, here the once useless pebble finally starts glowing in your back. It could have been just a cutscene, but having you be the person that presses the button to Mega Evolve Zygarde, select the Unheal Light move, and take that, even if theatralized, ownership over the final blow that saves the city is the sign of a truly engaging story. I got chills down my spine when Mega Evolving Zygarde, and it really felt like something that jumped straight out of a Pokemon movie. Just like Ash and friends casually arriving in a city and getting caught up in the middle of a mysterious legendary plot, so was your role in the fate of Lumiose City. And the sequence after the credits, with both letters waiting for us back at the hotel, had me in literal tears in a live stream in front of chat, and it felt really, really special to share that with my community. For me, someone who grew up watching and playing and dreaming stories exactly like this, what else could I ask from a Pokemon game? The Prism Tower is arguably the most important piece of real estate in the city. It's the postcard of Lumiose, and I'm sure that if your window has a good view of it, you will pay quite a bit more for your rent. It was also Quasarticle's mission to restore it, and the restoration of the tower is what gets the story started. But in the end, Ange is finally claimed back by nature. A union of nature and Pokemon to the man-made structure. Instead of real estate, it's now a public park. Clement's gym, once a sign of high technology, gets weird deer antlers. Perfect coexistence between humans and Pokemon. And it becomes X and Y shaped, but let's not get into that. Actually, no, let's get into that. Why is the Kalos trilogy called X, Y, and Z? What does everything we explored together so far tells us about the core theme of this game? Well, I think that what closes not only this story but also Pokemon X and Y in a neat little bow is the first mission you do for the Rust Syndicate. As per the housing crisis we have discussed, we have a man that is moving into a new apartment and sees that there were some migrant ghost-type Pokemon in there. We are tasked with kicking the ghosts out, but after seeing this, the man understands that this city, that apartment, belongs to both him and those Pokemon, and decides that he should live together with them. This game has wild zones that segregate people and Pokemon, has anti-homeless benches that dictate who is fit for the city and who isn't, has people who think we should live separated from nature, and people who think we should punch all the walls down and live together. This is a game about segregation, about living in cities, about living right next to people who might be really, really different from us. A game about sharing spaces, and a game about finding common ground. What is Pokemon X and Y about? According to Urbane, it could be as simple as the X and Y axis going in different directions, but there's still always being a point where they meet, and finding it is the important thing. Or like how people and Pokemon are totally different, but we should focus on the things we share. In his final letter to Team MZ, AZ writes, "It is, as you young ones once said, a joining of X and Y axes that were never expected to meet. May you all bring about a true evolution in the relationship between Pokemon and humankind. Even with so many differences in backgrounds, in religion, in gender, in ways to play and enjoy Pokemon, this is a story about how we need to find where our X and Y axes intercede, meet in that common point, and then move forward. Together with each other, together with nature, together with Pokemon." Okay, so I tried to focus this one on the main story characters because I love them, and I have been yapping for an hour 20 now, so I should really wrap this up, right? I could have talked more about so many things like the Shiny Charm, or Mabo and Team Flare and Nema and the new Megas, and here's my tier list, by the way, and yes, there are many other things this game could have done better, and I know there will be followers of mine that will be inevitably disappointed with my takes, but what can I do? I like the game, and this could go on for so much longer, but I know you have other videos to watch here on YouTube, and I can't keep writing this any longer, so maybe I can make a small sequel later, addressing those for post-games or DLC. Let me know in the comments. However, I really think that the comment section for this one will be one of those, so I will try my best to sum up everything we talked about while addressing some more common review talking points that I'm sure someone will comment below. Just try to be civil to everyone down there because everyone is allowed to enjoy or not enjoy any game that they want. But anyway, let me sum up why I believe that Pokémon Legends ZA might just be my favorite 3D Pokémon game. Legends ZA is an urban fable about coexistence and chosen families. A tale about a big city with small people and interconnected lives. It has never been this close to a Pokémon anime story, filled with complex and fascinating characters, in a busy place with many things going on that's inviting you to come explore it, but also just allows you to chill and sit at a cafe to enjoy the day with your Pokémon by your side. It has all I would want to have from a Pokémon game, and, unpopular opinion, I think it has good presentation. For some story beats and character models, I think it looks really sharp, and really well art directed. It wraps up the story of X and Y really neatly, tackling the themes of sharing spaces and segregation, the meeting of the X and Y axes. It tackles a really mature subtext, such as the housing crisis, class tension, and who are the people and Pokémon we share our living spaces with. Pokémon here, of course, is a metaphor for nature. This game writes the most engaging characters this series has ever seen, while using trainer typing as a storytelling device, and I find that incredible. It manages to do that while keeping the writing really funny, and with probably the best finale this series has ever seen, and I would like to credit this game's director, Haruka Toshigi. He is relatively new at Game Freak, and was the cinematic director for Legends Arceus. The person responsible for that game's story having been created from scratch, with a cinema mindset for every single big moment, instead of, cut to Zacian does a little spin that we see in Sword and Shield. Fellow content creator Liu Tu has an incredible video called The Savior of Modern Pokémon, where he goes deep into ZA and Toshigi's work, and I do recommend you go watch it. This game has a smaller scope, but with a map that is rich and filled with stories to engage with, places to explore, rare Pokémon to find, and that smaller scope is unfortunately a choice to make this run game smoothly not only on the Switch 2, but also on the Switch 1, which is a device, let me remind you, that has the same processing power as a 2014 smartphone. Legends ZA has a 4-year development timeline, the longest for any Pokémon game since Gen 1. It started as soon as Arceus was finalized, and while the learnings from Scarlet and Violet are not here from the start, I can see a lot of improvements, and I'm nothing but excited for the future of Pokémon on the Switch 2. As we know, the development cycle of Pokémon is different from other franchises, and Game Freak, which is not owned by Nintendo, is not the only one responsible for it. It's Game Freak, Nintendo, and Creatures Inc., the 3 co-owners of the Pokémon company, and game releases within the schedule of the most profitable franchise in the world are just a small cog in a system that encompasses anime releases, movies, live events, and merch sales. It is rare for Game Freak to have as much time as they want to develop a game, and that oftentimes means that there needs to be some course correction in between developments. It's no coincidence that the most celebrated games in each device are often the last ones to be released, because ideas that you have early in development end up being released before refinement is concluded. Emerald is often seen as the definitive Game Boy title, Black and White as the definitive DS titles, Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon as the 3DS games, and it wouldn't be different with the Nintendo Switch. The wild area in Sword and Shield feels like a first attempt at building something so intricate and fun as this Lumiose City, and it does feel like a natural progression of an open world concept. And again, This is not the only thing that has been in the development focus of this game. Of course, traversal and exploration are not as good as in Breath of the Wild, because they are not the main core of the gameplay. Legends ZA is a game which has as a main feature having to create an engaging and complex battle RPG system, implementing and balancing unique types, hundreds of moves, different size hitbox, hazards, held items, all of that alongside a compelling and engaging and immersive story, and a satisfying traversal. Breath of the Wild, one of my favorite games of all time, but it's also a game where you have like 7 types of weapons, and that's kind of it. With a 5-year development timeline that leaves enough time to focus on polishing other gameplay aspects. If Zelda had to work around 230 unique weapons, each with dozens of possible moves, with their own EVs and IVs, I can guarantee you, Hyrule would be smaller. It's always about prioritizing, it's apples and oranges. This means that with Pokémon, sometimes we will get games with gameplay ideas that haven't had a decade to mature yet, and I think it is, unfortunately, the price to pay for a franchise as embedded in a global market as it is. But not only do I see progress, but I see a push for innovation with ZA and the work of new directors such as Haruka Toshigi. If you want to go ahead and calm your shield, then go ahead and calm your shield. You can also notice that this hour-and-a-half long video didn't have a single sponsor break. But I think I'm just the kind of person who sees an issue and looks for structural causes instead of individual ones. Because what we see is hardly ever the product of this person is lazy or that person doesn't know how to do their job. If problems were simple as that, then the solution would just be hire someone else. And it hardly ever is. Most issues that we see in huge products like this are often linked to structure and processes, not individuals. But the truth is, not only did I really enjoy this game, I am extremely optimistic for a future of experimentation, of different battle systems, and even more immersive Pokémon games. The most important improving points to me here would be please figure out a better way to do these tutorials. It's really annoying to have to recommend a game to a friend and say, I swear it gets really good after 2 hours. It sucks having game items locked behind Nintendo Switch Online, and it's a bummer we don't have access to surf anymore. I really wish the wild zones were as interesting to explore as the rooftops of Lumiose. Maybe bring back outbreaks, rotate the species a little bit, give us a reason to return to these areas other than just, well, alphas are spawning now. And bring back my cakes! With Haruka at the helm and Pokémon becoming an even more cinematic experience, this conservative belief that voice acting hinders imagination instead of creating further immersion needs to go away. And please, we need a patch for this photo mode, just like we had for Scarlet and Violet, because the photos we were shown in the trailers are literally impossible to take. Yes, the pricing increase for this and every single game in the market does suck, and it is a situation that I have throughoutly explored in a previous video called Who Killed the Video Game Industry? I will not dive deep into that here, but if you are interested in what I have to say, go check it out. The final thing I would like to point out is that I don't really get the backlash about the DLC being announced before the game. DLC has always been a staple of Pokémon. It was even worse before. It was called a third version. And it's really naive to assume that they haven't been working on a DLC before the game released just because it hadn't been announced. It was likely our final direct of the year, and the next possible communication window is probably next year's Pokémon Day, where the focus will be on Gen 10. Write it down. If I'm wrong, you can come back on this video and write that I don't know anything about Pokémon. It's just a matter of communication, timing, and promotion, and I'm not saying it's a good thing. I just don't understand the surprise. This video is again getting super long, so I won't speak for much longer, but overall, this game was everything that I expected from it. It's a love letter to fans with immaculate vibes, a really distinct identity to differ from a main series game, and the best cast of characters in this franchise's history. And yes, I guess the windows could look nicer, but honestly, I find it very hard to notice windows when I'm having an unforgettably epic, cozy, and immersive Pokémon adventure, and the soundtrack bangs like this.
Did we get money? Oh my god. We got money from agiotas. How do I say agiota in English, chat? Is there any Brazilian here to help me out? I can't believe we got cash from agiotas. How do I say agiotas in English? Wait. Loan sharks. We got money from loan sharks. Meu Jesus, o Urban tá metido com a agiota.